So the first work that we're going to do is going to be on the form principle. And I'm gonna reference some art out of this book right here. And here's the artist. Um, see the see the hat here? See how we've got a light side and a dark side? And it's not all the way to black. See, here's black. But so see how the box has kind of a local, what we could call a local value. It's the value of the box. And then here's a shadow side. And there's a light side. Look at, we've actually got three tones, one, two, three tones on it, and then a black. Okay. And really, like everything inside of this picture will have the same stuff going on. So for instance, look in these gloves right here. As we look in the gloves, we're also, the side that's facing the light is going to be lightest. And then as the form turns around, it starts to move into little shadows. Okay, so let's have a look at what that looks like. When you have a form, this is the way that I was taught, and it kind of works for me. So that's a shape, okay? But when I go to here, okay, and that's a form. And then what we do is we imagine a light direction. And so you could say, like in the case of the piece that we're looking at, that the light direction is kind of coming from this way, a little bit like it's coming from above, but it's turned just slightly towards the front. And so I want to use, that's a softer lead. I want to use a harder lead to shade with. And so if I consider this the lightest side, and this right here, the second lightest side, and then over here, okay, so these three tones start to give me a volume description of form. So there's a couple pieces that I'd like for you to pay attention to when we're drawing like this. The first one is the character of the form that you're drawing. So for instance, a lot of the time when you start out learning to shade, you'll start to get talked to about these three shapes. Okay, so we've got a cylinder, a sphere, and a cube. And this gives us something like this. if we know how these three objects are shaded, it becomes a kind of key to most everything else that we need to shade. Now, the first thing that I want to, or not the first thing, but a thing that I want to call your attention to is that this is the most important first move where I establish the light direction. Okay, I want to do the same thing over here. And a lot of times, that could be enough. But then the next thing is notice the difference in value between here and here. Okay, and this it's the first move of creating a light effect. Okay, and then the next thing that we would do is we would start to transition based on the character of the shape that we're drawing. Okay, so this shape, because you see here how this side moving from this side to that side, it's a really abrupt transition. There's a 90-degree angle here. There's an angle like this, and the light is passing this way, and it goes over that edge. Okay, I want to zoom in on this part of the work. Okay, so see this? And the light is passing, and so you get this kind of transition. Now, if I think about this, the light is passing like this, and there's no corner here. And so the transition of light is this smooth gradation. This as well has a smooth gradation of tone that moves over from the shadow side, and it turns through a gradation into the light side. Okay. In this drawing, I'm including a couple of aspects of shading. Okay. You see the darkness right here? That's a core shadow. That's a terminator. And you see the lightness in the shadow right here? That's a reflected light. And this darkness down here, that's the occlusion. That's where no light can sneak in there. And I've got some here. Okay, so each of these shapes has a terminator. There's the terminator or core shadow. There's the terminator or core shadow. Here's the reflected light. And this is the halftone. Okay, and here's the halftone, and here's the halftone. And then we've moved out to the light. Okay, so the light. I'm not including specular light. I'm not including highlights in these. Just, we'll get to it. Okay. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to start to play with these shapes. And so for instance, if I wanted to shade a ribbon that's turning, say like this, I like to establish a line drawing first and then go in and shade. Okay. So as I'm thinking about this drawing, I'd be thinking about the light direction is coming from right here. So the stuff that faces the light most directly is right there. And then the form starts to turn away, and there's a certain point where you really aren't going to catch any light. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to identify that point. And so I think if the light is coming this way, I think that right here is the point where the light stops hitting this form. I think it's right there. I think over here, that's where the terminator would be. And then, so here's going to be the darkest part. Okay, here's going to be the darkest part. I want to put the darkest part right here. And then I'll turn up. This part here needs to stay light. And then it's this really gentle turn up, and there's the terminator. Okay. And now, because the light's coming from this way, this guy's going to cast a shadow onto this shape right here. So all this will fall into shadow. And then here's the most direct light again, and I'm going to turn up to the most direct light. You see that's a gradual transition towards the light there. See that little light here? That's reflected light. Okay, all of this in here is going to be in cast shadow. And then over there we'll have a little reflected light. Okay, here the light is coming this way. And so this area here will just be flat and light. See the way it's hitting flat on the ground? And then the cast shadow will be coming through like this. Here's this object casting a shadow onto here. Okay, I'm going to go back and add a little bit of occlusion. That could be a place underneath this. Okay, so now this is the basic principle. These are the principles that we're practicing. Another thing that I'd like for you to keep in mind, a couple things I'd like for you to keep in mind is, for one, see how clean the light is. Like if I'm working with values, I'm really like, I'll darken this value a little bit right here. I'm essentially working with, if I'm going to I'm essentially working with a dark, a medium, and a light, okay? As we go on, we can build up to about 9 values. But I found for my own work, I try to focus on just doing a dark, a medium, and a light. And that works really nicely for me. And each of these values we can get more, we can make subtle transitions between them. So for instance, I could start to look for the value that lives between those two. And it wants to be darker than this and equally lighter than this. And so it makes me feel like moving like this, moving the value. And over here, as I transition that way, I went too far. Although I might be able to darken this a little bit. And here I'm transitioning towards the light. So see how these 5 values, like this, here's a transition value, here's I'm going from this to that inside of here, okay? And this is in between those two. And that's really like, that's about as many values as I need for a ton of work. Okay. And so, but being able to very clearly be inside of one value or the other, depending on what's happening in your drawing. Okay. So the assignment that I asked for us to focus on was I asked for us to think about a skull. And what I want for you to do when you think about the skull is I want for you to sort of break it down into these shapes. And that's the way that we draw things that are a little bit more complicated. We look at them and we think, what are the component shapes that form them? Okay. And so if I think of the skull and I think of this shape, see how this is very similar to that shape? And the face mask, see how it's all squared? There's so many squares on the face and it's kind of a square. And you see how this shape here, it's kind of rounded like this. So let's talk about this. If I'm thinking of the head, the sort of brain case, okay, like this. And now this part here, I'm going to think of it as kind of a box, but I want to take it and I'm going to discuss it like this. Okay, that's the angle I want to draw the skull at so that we can really see the effect of the shading. So for a very simplified skull drawing, see how it comes to the halfway, the jaw, see how the jaw comes to the halfway, and then I'll move forward like this. Okay, now you see how this shape is essentially this shape connected to that shape. And as I think about how it would be that I would shade this, what I do is I reference that idea. I'm looking for what is my light direction and how does it work according to the forms that I'm describing. Okay, so for these two shapes, I'm going to simply reference this and this for right now. Okay, so if the light direction is coming this way, see the way the light cuts across? And so the light might cut across like this. And that would take this part of the head over here and drop it into shadow. And now the bottom part of the head in here, this area, which I'm saying is much more squared off. Okay, I'm going to reference that like this. I'm going to think, okay, so okay, see how as a beginning, it's kind of satisfying, right? Like you can see the beginning of a shaded drawing. And in some instances, it might be just plenty. Like if you're drawing a character and you think to yourself, okay, see how it really gets us started? This might be a bit too little. Like if you're working in watercolor, that would be the first, and here's the neck. And the neck is a cylinder. Okay, so I would think about it being shaded like this. There's a light side and the dark side. Okay, here's the neck, and the neck is a cylinder. And what you want to avoid is you may see details in the light area, but you want to keep them light. You want to like not let the value, and you may see light areas in here, but you want to kind of keep them dark. And then the next thing that you would do is you would gradually create a transition from light to dark. Here, you see, because it's a smoother transition. See how I'm getting a reflected light in here? And I like that. And over here, if I darken the core shadow and then turn into the light area, that will give me a sense of okay. So the next thing that we would want to do is draw things that are, so this is kind of the first thing that you want to start to practice right here. You want to start taking complicated shapes. This is a complicated shape, okay? And you want to start to see it in a sort of simplified term. Like you want to be able to say, okay, here's like this has structure, it has perspective, it might be that it has gesture, and then it starts having a light effect, and the light effect is really where shading begins. Okay, now the only piece that I'd like to add to this is when we're working with objects that have different local values. So different local values are, for instance, if I have, say I want to take this box, take a box. Okay. Now imagine that it's a dark box. We're going to say it's a dark box that has a light ribbon on it. All right. So if the box is dark, but the ribbon is light, and now I've moved into the stage of the drawing where I'm going to shade it. Okay, the first thing that I want to do is I want to find out how light, if I make this darkness here, see my light direction is the same, it's that direction. If I make this darkness like this, then this value has to go darker. And let's keep in mind, I want to put some occlusion underneath the box. And this value here would be looking to be something in between those two values. And now what I'm trying to do is I'm using a harder pencil, and I'm going in and I'm trying to, with a harder pencil, I can make a more subtle move. And I'm trying to, again, establish light, medium, dark in a darker range, okay? See how here I'm having it's lighter because it's got reflected light? Okay, so now as the light turns from light, this is going to be medium light right here. And this would be dark light. Sorry, the pencil has some glare on it. So, but you can see how the white turns this way and it's lighter, and when it turns this way it's darker, and you can see how the black, when it turns this way, when the dark turns this way, it's darker, and when it turns this way it's lighter. Okay, so this example here shows local value being it shows local value and form turning. So it's a difference of local value. I've got a light local value and a dark local value. Over here, this is all the same local value, okay? And that's the first lesson, and it covers, what we're covering the basics of lighting, okay? Which the basics of lighting are, it involves a direction, it involves light, halftone, terminator, reflected light, and occlusion. And we'll add highlight to that a little bit later, specular light to that. So you see we've got light direction, light, a halftone, and in this case there's a gradation, a terminator, a dark area, a reflected light, and that's occlusion. Okay, here we have light, halftone, shadow, reflected light, occlusion. Okay, and the same here and the same here. Okay, that's our first lesson.